Good afternoon, ma'am. You were speeding through the school zone, and it appears your vehicle also struck a crossing sign.
Gosh, what an inconvenience. I don't have time for this. I'm already late.
I understand, ma'am, but I still need your license and registration.
Valerie let out a short, sharp laugh, as if Officer Ballman's request were ridiculous.
Do you know who I am? One phone call, and you'll be lucky if you're still directing traffic by tomorrow. You see, my husband is a judge. You understand what that means?
Ma'am, I simply need your cooperation so we can move forward.
You have no idea who you're dealing with, officer.
Valerie had no idea the officer she was threatening wasn't the one whose future was in danger. Officer Frederick Ballman sat in his patrol car outside Fairview Elementary, watching the clock. It was 2:40 in the afternoon. School would let out in 20 minutes, and this street would fill with kids and crossing guards and parents in a hurry. He liked working this shift. Somebody had to make sure everyone slowed down. 6 years on the job had taught him one thing above all else: pay attention. Little things mattered. He kept his radar gun steady and his eyes on the road. That's when the silver BMW came flying around the corner. It was going fast. Too fast. Frederick's radar gun locked on the number, and his stomach dropped. 30 miles over the limit, right past a school zone. The car swerved into the other lane, then jerked back, clipping the edge of a crossing guard's stop sign. The guard jumped back, startled, papers scattering from her clipboard. Frederick didn't wait. He hit his lights and pulled out after the car. The BMW didn't stop right away. It took 4 blocks, weaving slightly, before it finally pulled over to the curb. Frederick radioed in the stop, gave his location, and stepped out of his cruiser. He kept his hand near his belt, out of habit, and walked up to the driver's side window. The woman inside was still on her phone. She didn't even look at him at first. She was mid-sentence, talking loud and fast to someone on the other end, something about a luncheon and a seating chart. Frederick tapped lightly on the glass. "Ma'am, can you roll your window down for me?" She glanced over, annoyed, like he'd interrupted something important. The window came down halfway. "Afternoon," Frederick said. "I'm Officer Ballman. I clocked you doing 62 and a 32 in an active school zone. You also made contact with a crossing sign back there." He said it clearly, calmly, the same way he always did. Frederick had a habit of narrating his stops out loud, stating what he saw, what he was doing, step by step. His old training officer had drummed it into him years ago. "Say it for the camera, son. Say it so nobody can twist it later." His body cam sat on his chest, recording every word. In the passenger seat, a young man sat frozen, eyes wide. He's dressed in a polo shirt, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. He leaned toward the woman. "Mom," he said quietly. "Mom, just take the ticket." She waved a hand at him, without even turning her head. "Thomas, be quiet." Then she looked back at Frederick, and something in her face changed. Not fear, not worry. Just pure annoyance, like she was looking at an inconvenience instead of a police officer. "I don't have time for this," she said. "I'm already late." "I understand that, ma'am. But I still need your license and registration." She let out a short, sharp laugh, like the request itself was ridiculous. "Do you have any idea how fast you're about to ruin your day?" Frederick didn't flinch. He'd heard plenty of lines like that before. People said all kinds of things when they got pulled over. Most of them didn't mean anything once the adrenaline wore off. "License and registration," he said again. "That's all I need right now." She sighed loudly, dramatically, and reached for her purse like it was the biggest imposition of her week. Thomas sank lower in his seat, his face red with embarrassment. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at Frederick, like he already knew where this was headed and wanted no part of it. The woman pulled out her license and practically threw it out the window at Frederick instead of handing it to him. It fluttered, and he caught it before it hit the ground. He looked down at the name printed on it. Valerie Amerson. He didn't recognize the name? Not yet. He simply nodded, turned it over in his hand, and started walking back toward his cruiser to run it through the system. Behind him, he heard her voice again, muttering something to her son about wasted time and how ridiculous this whole thing was. Frederick kept walking. He'd learned a long time ago not to let attitude get under his skin. People were allowed to be annoyed. That wasn't a crime. What happened next would be. Frederick walked back to Valerie's window with her license and a printed citation. Clean record. No priors. That didn't matter now. She'd still be getting a ticket for the speed and the sign. Ma'am, I'm citing you for reckless driving and failure to maintain a safe lane in a school zone, he said, holding the ticket out. You'll need to sign here. This isn't an admission of guilt, just confirms you received it. Valerie didn't reach for it. She threw her door open instead and stepped out onto the road, right into the open traffic lane, phone still gripped in one hand. Ma'am, please stay on the sidewalk side. It's not safe. Don't tell me where to stand. Her voice was sharp now, louder than before. A car swerved slightly to avoid her, honking. Frederick stepped in and gently took her by the arm to guide her back toward the curb, away from traffic. She ripped her arm free like his hand had burned her. Don't you touch me. She said it loud enough that people 2 houses down turned to look. Her face had gone red, twisted with something ugly. Do you know who I am? Frederick kept his hands at his sides now. Calm. Steady. Ma'am, I need you to step back onto the sidewalk. My husband is Judge Amerson. She spat the name out like it was supposed to mean something, like it was a key that unlocked every door in the county. Judge Rio Amerson. You understand what that means? I will end your career before I even sit down for lunch today. You'll be lucky to find work directing traffic in a trailer park by Friday. In the passenger seat, Thomas had gone pale. Mom, stop, please. She wasn't listening. She stepped closer to Frederick, close enough that he could smell her perfume, her finger jabbing toward his chest. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back. She didn't step back. She swatted at the citation book still in his hand, knocking it out of his grip. It hit the pavement, pages fanning open. Then, before Frederick could react, she shoved him, both hands flat against his chest, hard enough to push him back a step. For a second, the street went quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop. Valerie didn't seem to understand what she'd just done. If anything, she looked satisfied, like she'd finally gotten her point across. She held up her phone, filming herself now, chin lifted, playing to an audience that didn't exist yet. You're going to regret this, she said into the camera, voice shaking with fury. This is what happens in this country. This is exactly what's wrong. I'm a taxpayer. I fund your paycheck. Thomas had gotten out of the car now, hovering near the hood, his hands raised like he was trying to calm a spooked animal. Mom, please, get back in the car. Please. She shrugged him off without even looking at him. Thomas, stay out of this. Frederick reached down, slow and deliberate, and picked up his citation book off the ground. He straightened up. His voice, when it came, was flat and even. The same tone he used for everything else that afternoon. Ma'am, you just assaulted a police officer. You struck me and you interfered with a lawful traffic stop. I did no such thing. Her voice cracked with disbelief, like the accusation itself was an insult too big to comprehend. I barely touched you. You're being placed under arrest. Her mouth fell open. For the first time since she'd stepped out of that car, she looked genuinely stunned, like the words didn't compute. Excuse me? Do you have any idea what you're about to do to yourself right now? Frederick unclipped his cuffs from his belt. He kept his voice level, kept narrating for the body cam, same as he'd done since the moment he pulled her over. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You cannot be serious. She looked past him, toward the growing crowd of neighbors now standing on porches, phones raised. "Somebody call my husband. Somebody get Judge Emerson on the phone right now." Nobody moved. A few of the neighbors kept filming instead, faces caught somewhere between shock and fascination. Frederick took her wrist, gentle but firm. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, twisting slightly. "You have no idea the mistake you're making. Turn around, ma'am." This time she did. The cuffs clicked shut around Valerie Emerson's wrists, and the whole street seemed to lean in to watch. By now, a small crowd had gathered on the lawns and porches nearby. A woman in gardening gloves stood frozen by her mailbox. Two teenage boys on bikes had stopped in the middle of the road, phones already up and recording. An older man sat on his porch swing, not even pretending not to stare. Valerie twisted against the cuffs, her face blotchy with rage. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Do you people understand who my husband is?" Frederick didn't answer. He guided her toward his cruiser, one hand steady on her arm, his voice calm as he read her rights out loud. She talked over him the entire time, her words tumbling out fast and sharp. "You will regret this. You have no idea the mistake you just made. My husband will have your badge by tonight, I promise you that." Thomas stood near the BMW, hands pressed against his face, mortified. "Mom, please, just stop talking," he said quietly. But she wasn't listening to him anymore. She wasn't listening to anyone. A second patrol car pulled up moments later, lights flashing. Officer Reyes stepped out, taking in the scene, the citation book still lying near the curb, the crowd of neighbors filming, the woman shouting threats from the back of Frederick's cruiser. "Balmond, everything all right?" "Under control," Frederick said. "She assaulted me during a routine stop. It's all on body cam." Reyes glanced toward the car, where Valerie was still yelling, banging her cuffed hands against the window now, demanding someone call her husband. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I bet it is." Frederick walked Reyes through it fast. The speed, the sign, the shove, the threat. He kept his voice even the whole time, the way he always did, laying out facts instead of feelings. Reyes nodded along, already pulling out his notepad to log it as a witness. Behind them, one of the teenage boys with the bike lowered his phone and turned to his friend. "Bro, she just shoved a cop. On camera. She's done." His friend laughed, shaking his head. "Rich people are wild, man." They had no idea how right they were. At the station, Valerie was fingerprinted and photographed like any other arrestee, except she didn't act like any other arrestee. She complained the whole time. About the ink on her fingers, about the lighting for her mugshot, about the officer's tone, about everything. She demanded a phone call almost immediately, and Frederick expected her to ask for a lawyer. She didn't. She called someone named Perry. Frederick caught the name from a few feet away while filing paperwork at the next desk. Valerie's voice dropped low and urgent, hissing into the phone about needing this handled before it went any further. She didn't sound scared anymore. She sounded impatient, like she was dealing with a delay instead of an arrest. Frederick filed the detail away without thinking too much of it. Not a lawyer's name he recognized. Not yet, anyway. By the time his shift ended that evening, the video was already spreading online. Someone from the crowd had posted the clip of Valerie shoving Frederick, screaming about her husband, refusing to calm down. It wasn't a flattering video. Not for her, anyway. Comments piled up fast, most of them furious on Frederick's behalf, disgusted by her tone, her entitlement, the way she'd spoken to him like he was beneath her. "Do you know who I am?" the caption read, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Frederick watched it once at his desk, jaw tight, before closing the app. He didn't feel proud of the attention. He felt tired. Something about the whole afternoon sat heavy in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name yet. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. A sense that this wasn't over just because he'd done everything right. He thought about the name again. Judge Emerson. He didn't know much about the man, only that judges carried weight most people never had to think about. Weight that could crush a career without anyone raising their voice. He thought about the phone call to Perry, too. The way she'd said it. Not desperate, not scared. Certain. Like she already knew exactly who to call to make this go away. Frederick grabbed his keys and headed home, telling himself it was nothing. But some part of him already knew better. Frederick got home a little after 7, but he didn't rest. He sat down at his kitchen table, laptop open, and pulled up his body cam footage from the file he'd already backed up. It was a habit he never skipped. Every shift, every stop, he copied his footage onto his own personal drive before logging out for the night. His old training officer used to say it different ways, but it always came down to the same idea. Protect your own truth. Nobody else will do it for you. He watched the footage back once, start to finish, checking the timestamps, making sure everything lined up the way it should. The stop, the shove, the arrest. All of it clean, all of it clear. Then something caught his eye. A small log at the bottom of his phone tracking notes from dispatch showed Valerie's call activity during the stop. 3 calls, made in the span of 9 minutes. 1 to a contact saved as Thomas. 1 to a contact saved as Perry. And 1 more, a call to a number Frederick didn't recognize at first, until he ran it and saw it belonged to the county clerk's office. A direct line. Not the general number anyone could look up online. A private, internal extension. Frederick sat back in his chair, frowning at the screen. Why would a woman getting pulled over for speeding need a direct line to the courthouse clerk's office in the middle of a traffic stop? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. He saved the note and closed his laptop, telling himself it probably meant nothing. People had all kinds of contacts saved in their phones. It didn't have to mean anything at all. His phone buzzed before he could talk himself out of thinking about it further. Captain White's name flashed on the screen. Balmond. My office. Now, if you can. He was back at the precinct 20 minutes later, standing in front of Captain Dolores White's desk. She looked tired in a way he rarely saw from her. Her arms crossed, jaw tight. Sit down, she said. He sat. Judge Amerson called the chief personally about an hour ago. She said it flatly, like she was still trying to process it herself. Not through his office, not through a lawyer. Him, directly. Demanding to know why his wife is sitting in a holding cell. Frederick kept his voice steady. She assaulted me during a lawful stop, Captain. It's all on body cam. She shoved me, knocked the citation book out of my hand. I've seen the footage, Frederick. White held up a hand. I know exactly what happened. You did nothing wrong. That's not what this conversation is about. Then what is it about? White leaned forward, elbows on her desk. It's about the fact that a sitting judge just called the top of this department demanding answers, and that never happens for no reason. Men like that don't call because they're worried about the truth coming out. They call because they think they can make it disappear. Frederick felt something cold settle in his stomach. You think he's going to try something. I know he's going to try something. White rubbed her temples. I don't know what yet. But I need you to understand something right now, and I need you to hear it clearly. Being right isn't going to be enough here. You did everything by the book today. That footage is airtight, and it still might not matter. With respect, Captain, if the footage is airtight, how does it not matter? Because people with money and power don't play by the same rules the rest of us do. Her voice was hard now, edged with something that sounded almost like anger. Not at him, but at the situation itself. They don't fight fair. They find the cracks. They find the angles. And they use every bit of leverage they have until something gives. Frederick sat with that for a moment, thinking of the phone call to the clerk's office. He almost mentioned it, but something told him to hold off. Not yet. Not until he understood it himself. White straightened up. Her voice softened, just slightly. Document everything, Frederick. Every conversation, every email, every interaction from here on out. Because I promise you, this isn't over. This is just starting. Frederick nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him like a stone. He had no idea yet just how right she was. Frederick barely slept that night. He kept replaying White's words in his head, turning them over like a stone he couldn't put down. This isn't over. This is just starting. He got to the precinct the next morning 10 minutes early, badge clipped on, coffee untouched on his desk. He'd barely sat down before White appeared in her doorway, waving him over. "Balmond, now." He followed her in. She shut the door behind him, which she almost never did. "Valerie Amerson's case has been reassigned," she said. No warm-up, no easing into it. Frederick blinked. Reassigned to who? A different courtroom. Judge Holloway's docket. White slid a printed memo across the desk toward him. Request came in late last night, approved by the clerk's office before the sun even came up. No red flags on paper. Perfectly normal scheduling adjustment, according to the file. Frederick scanned the memo, jaw tightening. Holloway's known for going easy on stuff like this. Everybody knows that. Everybody in this building knows that. White's voice was flat, controlled, but he could hear the frustration underneath it. "Doesn't mean I can prove anything improper happened. It's just a scheduling request, perfectly legal on its face." Frederick set the memo down slowly. "That's not all, is it?" White exhaled through her nose. "No. Internal Affairs opened a formal review of your conduct during yesterday's arrest. Use of force complaint. There was no use of force." Frederick felt heat rise in his chest, fast and sharp. "I cuffed a woman after she assaulted me. It's on body cam, Captain, every second of it." "I know that." White's eyes didn't waver. "I've watched it 3 times already. You did everything right. But right now, that doesn't matter to the people pulling strings on this. They're not trying to prove you did something wrong. They're trying to make enough noise that it doesn't matter whether you did." Frederick sat back, absorbing it. It was happening exactly the way she'd warned him. Fast, quiet, efficient. No shouting, no threats out in the open, just paperwork, moved around by people who knew exactly how the system worked from the inside. "What happens to me?" he asked. "For now, nothing official." White's jaw was tight. "I'm slow-walking the suspension paperwork as long as I can justify it. But Frederick, I need you to understand, I can only hold this back so long before somebody above me starts asking why I haven't moved on it." Frederick nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Understood. I mean it. Watch yourself. Document everything, like I told you. And don't do anything that gives them an excuse." He left her office with his mind spinning, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He went through the rest of his shift on autopilot, professional, quiet, giving nobody a single reason to point fingers. But underneath it, something had shifted in him. He wasn't going to just sit back and hope the truth was enough. He'd learned that lesson clearly enough from White already. That night, he sat down at his kitchen table again, laptop open. The same one he'd used to review his body cam footage the night before. This time, he pulled up the county court records website instead. A public database, free for anyone to search. He typed in one name. Amerson, Rio. Case after case populated the screen. Frederick scrolled slowly, reading through summaries, dates, outcomes. Most of it looked ordinary at first glance, routine rulings, standard sentencing. But he kept scrolling, kept clicking, cross-referencing names and dates in a notebook beside his laptop. The same methodical habit he used building any case file at work. Hours passed. His coffee went cold beside him. Somewhere around midnight, a pattern started to take shape, faint but unmistakable, like a photograph slowly developing in a dark room. He wasn't ready to say what it meant yet. He didn't have enough, not close to enough. But he knew one thing for certain, sitting there in the quiet of his kitchen with the glow of the screen lighting his face. This wasn't just about Valerie Amerson anymore, and he couldn't do this alone. Frederick spent the next 4 nights the same way. Come home, eat something quick standing over the sink, then sit down at his kitchen table with his laptop and the public court records database open in front of him. He built a spreadsheet, simple at first, just names and dates and case outcomes. But as the days passed, it grew more detailed. Column by column, he tracked every case that came through Judge Rio Emerson's courtroom over the past several years. DUI charges, reckless driving, assault. He wasn't looking for anything specific at first. He was just looking. By the 4th night, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Case after case, dismissed, reduced. Plea deals that barely counted as consequences at all. And every single time, the defendant shared something in common. Money, connections, a last name that showed up in the society pages or on donor lists for local charities. Meanwhile, similar cases involving people without those connections ran their normal course. Full charges, full sentences. Nothing softened. Frederick sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling something cold settle into his chest. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't one judge having an occasional soft day in court. This was a decade-long habit, buried in plain sight, hiding behind the boring language of court records nobody bothered to read closely. He thought about Valerie's threat on the street. "My husband is Judge Emerson. I will end your career." At the time, it sounded like an angry woman throwing out an empty threat, the kind people said when they were desperate and cornered. Now it felt different. Now it felt like she actually believed it, because she'd watched her husband bend the system before, more than once, for people just like her. The next morning, things got worse before he even sat down at his desk. White called him into her office again, this time with a folder already open in front of her. "IA's moving faster than I expected," she said. "Formal hearing's been scheduled." 2 weeks out. Frederick felt his stomach tighten. 2 weeks. And in the meantime, you're pulled off patrol. Desk duty. Effective today. White's voice was clipped, professional, but her eyes told him she hated saying it as much as he hated hearing it. "I fought to keep it that way instead of a straight suspension. It's the best I could do." Frederick nodded, jaw tight, and didn't argue. Arguing wouldn't change anything. He grabbed his gear and reported to a desk near the back of the precinct, filing paperwork and answering phones for people who used to be his equals on patrol. A few co-workers gave him sympathetic looks. A few others avoided eye contact entirely, like his bad luck might be contagious. He kept his head down and did the work in front of him. But every night, he went home and kept building his other case, the real one, the one nobody at the department had asked him to build. He added more names to his spreadsheet, more dates, more patterns. He printed pages and pages of records, spreading them across his kitchen table until it looked less like a dinner spot and more like a detective's wall, minus the string and the push pins. One night, staring at the spreadsheet, he realized something simple and frustrating at the same time. He could see the pattern clearly now. He could feel, in his gut, that something was deeply wrong with how Judge Emerson ran his courtroom. But feeling it and proving it were two very different things. Public records only showed him outcomes, not reasons. He needed someone who understood the inside of that courthouse, someone who could explain why these cases kept landing softly, again and again, for the same kinds of people. He wasn't a detective. Not yet, anyway. He was a patrol officer stuck behind a desk, building a case in his kitchen at midnight because nobody else seemed willing to ask the questions he was asking. He needed help. Someone outside the department, someone who could dig where his badge couldn't reach without permission he didn't have. He thought about the video of Valerie's arrest, still circulating online days later, still drawing comments and shares. Somebody out there had already been watching this story unfold from the outside. Maybe it was time he let them in. The email came in on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after Frederick had started thinking about reaching out to someone himself. It landed in his personal inbox, not his work one, which told him whoever sent it had done some digging just to find him. Officer Balmond, my name is Nadine Orser. I cover local news and courts for the Tribune. I covered the video of your arrest of Valerie Amerson last week. I think there's more to this story than what made it online, and I think you might agree. No pressure to respond, but if you're willing to talk, off the record, I'm listening. Frederick read it twice, then a third time, sitting at his kitchen table with his spreadsheet still open on the other half of the screen. He knew exactly what talking to a reporter could do to him right now, in the middle of an IA hearing, with his job already hanging by a thread. One wrong word, one thing taken out of context, and it could be used to paint him as unprofessional, as someone who couldn't be trusted to keep department business private. But he also knew what silence had gotten him so far. Nothing. Just a desk job and a slow-moving hearing designed to make him disappear quietly. He wrote back 2 words. Off record? Completely, she replied within minutes. You control what becomes public. I just want to understand what's really happening here. They met 2 days later at a diner on the edge of town, far enough from the precinct that nobody would recognize him. Nadine was younger than he expected, sharp-eyed, a notebook already open on the table before he'd even sat down. She didn't waste time with small talk. I've been looking into Judge Emerson for a while now, she said, sliding her coffee aside. Ever since your arrest video went viral, I started pulling threads. Something about the whole thing felt off to me. The scheduling reassignment on Valerie's case happened almost overnight. That doesn't happen without somebody making a call. Frederick kept his expression neutral, careful. What kind of somebody? Nadine flipped open her notebook, tapping a page filled with notes. I traced the reassignment request back to an internal extension at the courthouse. Belongs to a clerk named Darcy Farrell. She's worked there almost 12 years. And get this, she's processed an unusual number of similar reassignment requests over the years, always involving cases with connections to the Amerson family or their circle. Frederick felt his pulse pick up. He hadn't mentioned the clerk's number to anyone yet, not even White. How do you know that? Public request logs. Took some digging, but it's all technically available if you know where to look and how to ask the right questions. Nadine studied him for a moment. You already knew about her, didn't you? Frederick hesitated, then nodded slowly. Valerie called that same extension during the traffic stop, before she called a lawyer, before she called anyone else. Nadine's eyes lit up, the way a person's does when 2 separate puzzle pieces suddenly click together. That confirms it then. This isn't just a pattern of soft rulings. Somebody inside that courthouse is actively coordinating which cases land where, on request, for the right people. They sat with that for a moment, the noise of the diner fading into the background. Frederick felt the weight of it settle over him, heavier now that someone else could see it too. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't chasing shadows out of anger or pride. I want to be careful here, Frederick said finally. I've got an IA hearing in less than 2 weeks. Anything that looks like I'm feeding a reporter information to save my own skin could blow up in my face. Nadine nodded, understanding immediately. I won't use your name. I won't even confirm you as a source if anyone asks. I've got enough from public records to build a story without needing to attach you to any of it directly. What's the story? The dismissal pattern. Amerson's courtroom outcomes, laid out plainly, with the numbers speaking for themselves. No accusations, no names beyond his. Just the truth, printed clearly enough that people can draw their own conclusions. Frederick studied her for a long moment, weighing the risk. But something about her felt steady, careful, like someone who understood exactly how much was at stake and wasn't going to be careless with it. Do it, he said finally. Nadine closed her notebook. A small, determined smile crossed her face. It's going to publish by the end of the week. The next week moved fast, faster than Frederick expected. On Wednesday, He got word that his IA hearing had officially escalated. What started as a routine review was now a formal hearing with a panel, and his desk duty had been extended indefinitely until it concluded. He sat across from White as she delivered the news, her voice careful, controlled, but tight with frustration she couldn't quite hide. "They're building something," she said. "I don't like the speed of this. Reviews like this usually crawl. This one's moving like somebody wants it finished before anyone starts asking questions." Frederick nodded, jaw tense. "Understood. Just keep your head down. Do your job. Don't give them anything else to point at." He left her office and went back to his desk, stacking paperwork, answering phones, doing everything asked of him and nothing more. It was hard, sitting there each day, watching other officers head out on patrol while he shuffled reports. But he kept reminding himself of the spreadsheet at home, the pattern he'd found, the reporter now working the same thread from a different angle. He wasn't just waiting anymore. He was building something too. Nadine's article published Friday morning. Frederick read it standing in his kitchen before his shift, coffee forgotten on the counter. The headline was careful, measured, nothing sensational. Pattern of leniency raises questions about county judge's courtroom. The article laid out case after case, all sourced from public records, all pointing toward the same uncomfortable conclusion: that Judge Rayo Amerson's courtroom had, for years, treated well-connected defendants differently than everyone else. It never mentioned Frederick's name. It never mentioned Valerie's arrest directly, though anyone paying attention could connect the dots easily enough. By that afternoon, the story was everywhere. Local news picked it up first, then a few statewide outlets followed. Comment sections filled with outrage, people sharing their own stories of unfair treatment, demanding accountability. The video of Valerie's arrest resurfaced again, too, gaining fresh attention now that people had a bigger picture to attach it to. At the precinct, the mood shifted. Frederick noticed it in small ways. Officers who'd avoided eye contact with him for days, now nodding at him in the hallway, a couple even stopping to say they'd seen the article and thought it was about time somebody looked into it. It wasn't vindication exactly, not yet, but it felt like something. Like maybe the truth had a way of finding daylight, even when powerful people tried to keep it buried. White pulled him aside again that evening, right before his shift ended. Her office door stayed open this time. "You didn't have anything to do with that article, did you?" she asked, though her tone made clear she already suspected otherwise. "I talked to a reporter," Frederick admitted. "Off the record. Didn't give her anything that wasn't already public." White studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I'm not going to ask you to stop, but I need you to understand something. The department's feeling pressure from both directions now. Public pressure, thanks to that article, and pressure from the other side, too. I got another call today, a lot less friendly than Judge Amerson's first one. Somebody higher up wanting to know why this is dragging on, why it isn't resolved yet. Resolved how? I don't know yet. That's what worries me." White's eyes were tired. Worn down by a week of walking a tightrope Frederick had put her on without meaning to. "Just watch yourself. Things are getting bigger than a single traffic stop now, and bigger things tend to attract bigger attention. Not all of it good." Frederick nodded, thanking her before heading out for the night. The drive home felt heavier than usual, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He kept replaying her words, turning them over, trying to figure out what shape the pressure might take next. He pulled into his apartment complex a little after 8, tired, ready to eat something, and collapse for the night. But as he walked toward the entrance, something made him slow down. A car he didn't recognize sat parked near the front of the building, engine off, headlights dark. Nothing unusual about that on its own. Plenty of visitors parked there every night. But something about it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Some instinct built from years of paying attention to things that didn't quite fit. He glanced at it once, then kept walking toward the entrance, telling himself it was nothing. He didn't get far before a voice called out behind him, calm and pleasant, entirely too friendly for the hour. "Officer Balmond. Got a minute?" Frederick turned slowly. A man stood a few feet away, near the entrance to the lobby, dressed in a suit that looked too expensive for a random visit to an apartment complex like this one. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry to catch you off guard," the man said, stepping closer, hand extended. "Perry Lober. I work with the Emerson family." Frederick didn't take the hand. He kept his own at his sides, weight balanced, every instinct from 6 years on the job snapping into focus. "It's late," Frederick said, "and I don't do business on my own doorstep." Perry's smile didn't waver. He lowered his hand smoothly, like the rejection hadn't bothered him at all. "This won't take long. I just wanted to have a conversation." One professional to another. "I'm not sure what we'd have to talk about." "I think you know exactly what we have to talk about." Perry's voice stayed light, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "That article this week, the one with all those court records laid out so neatly. Interesting timing, don't you think? Right in the middle of your little internal review." Frederick kept his face still, giving nothing away. "I don't control what reporters write." "Of course not." Perry nodded slowly, like he was agreeing with a child. "But you do control what you say to them. And I think it might be time somebody reminded you how much you have riding on staying quiet right now." The words hung in the air, casual on the surface, sharp underneath. Frederick felt his jaw tighten. "Is that a threat?" Perry laughed softly, shaking his head. "No, no, nothing like that. I'm just a concerned friend of the family, making conversation." He paused, glancing toward the building behind Frederick, almost thoughtful. "You're engaged, aren't you?" "Fiancé works over at St. Mary's. Nursing license, if I remember right." Frederick's stomach dropped, cold and sudden. "Funny thing about licensing boards," Perry continued, voice still pleasant, still calm. "Reviews can happen any time. Little complaints get filed. Things get complicated fast for people who didn't even do anything wrong. Real shame when that happens to somebody's whole career over something that has nothing to do with them." Frederick's hands curled into fists at his sides, anger burning hot and immediate. But he forced himself to stay still, stay quiet. He knew exactly what this was. A threat wrapped in soft words, deniable on its face, impossible to prove in a courtroom. Nothing Perry had said could be pinned down as illegal. That was the point. "You should head home," Frederick said, voice low and even. "Before I decide this conversation counts as harassment." Perry held up both hands, stepping back, still smiling that same easy smile. "Just a friendly chat, officer. That's all this was. Have a good night." He turned and walked back toward the unmarked car, climbing in without another word. Frederick stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear down the street, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. He didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about his fiancée, about her years of school, her exams, her long shifts at the hospital, all of it hanging in the balance because of something Frederick had done that he still believed, deep down, was right. The next morning, he went straight to White's office before his shift even started. "I need something concrete," he told her, laying it out plainly. The visit, the veiled threat, the mention of his fiancée's license. White listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with every word. "That's a documented threat," she said when he finished. "Off the record or not. That's serious. I need more than documentation. I need leverage." Frederick leaned forward. "Valerie's assault charge is still active. I want her phone records pulled, legally, through the subpoena process. If there's a pattern of coordination between her and that clerk's office, it'll show up there." White studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's a request I can justify. It's tied directly to an active charge, nothing improper about it." She reached for her phone. "I'll get the paperwork moving today." Frederick felt something steady settle into his chest for the first time in days. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was a plan. One built on solid ground instead of guesses. One they couldn't dismiss as harassment or overreach. "How long until we see results?" he asked. "A few days, maybe a week." White was already dialing. "Let's hope it's worth the wait." 5 days passed before the subpoenaed phone records landed on White's desk. Frederick had spent those 5 days doing exactly what she told him. Head down, desk duty, no complaints, no slip-ups. But underneath the calm surface, he counted every hour. When White finally called him into her office, she didn't say a word at first. She just slid a thick folder across the desk toward him. Frederick opened it slowly. Pages of call logs filled the folder, timestamps lined up neatly down the side. He found the day of the arrest first, scanning until he reached the window of time right after Valerie had been placed in the back of his patrol car. There it was, laid out in black and white, exactly the way Dispatch's earlier log had suggested. A call to Thomas, lasting 11 seconds. Then, immediately after, a call to the courthouse clerk's direct line. 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. Only after that did she call anyone identified as legal counsel. Frederick felt his pulse quicken as the pieces locked into place. She called the clerk before she called a lawyer. Before her own son even had time to explain what was happening. White added, tapping the page. "That's not panic, Frederick. That's muscle memory. That's someone who's made that exact call before and knew precisely who to reach." Frederick closed the folder carefully, like it might slip away from him if he moved too fast. "I need to show this to Nadine." White hesitated, then nodded. "Do it carefully. This needs to hold up, not just make headlines." Frederick met Nadine that same evening at the same diner as before, sliding the folder across the table without a word. She read through it in silence, her expression growing sharper with every page, until she finally looked up at him. "This confirms everything," she said. "I need to talk to the clerk directly. Darcy Farrell. If I can get her on record, even partially, this becomes undeniable." "She's not going to want to talk," Frederick said. "Not if she's been doing this for years without getting caught." "People talk when they're scared of going down alone," Nadine said, already gathering her things. "Especially when somebody else's name is already circulating in headlines." 2 days later, Nadine called Frederick late in the evening. Her voice tight with excitement, she was clearly trying to keep contained. "She talked," Nadine said. "Not everything, but enough. On record, with her name attached. She admitted to processing reassignment requests for Amerson-connected defendants going back years. Said she felt cornered. Said she'd been doing it so long she stopped questioning it." Frederick sat down slowly at his kitchen table, absorbing the weight of it. "She's putting her own career on the line by saying that." "She already knew that walking in," Nadine said. "I think she's tired of carrying it alone." The story published the following morning, and this time it didn't stay quiet. Nadine's follow-up article named Darcy Farrell directly, laid out her admission in full, tied it back to the earlier pattern of dismissals, and connected the timeline of Valerie's own call that day as the clearest example yet of how the system worked. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was confirmed, on record, by someone who'd lived inside it. By that afternoon, the district attorney's office issued a statement. A preliminary ethics inquiry was being opened into Judge Rio Amerson's conduct on the bench. Frederick watched the announcement on the small television in the precinct break room, standing shoulder to shoulder with a few other officers who'd gathered to watch. Nobody said much. Nobody had to. The mood in the room felt different than it had in weeks. Lighter, sharper, like something finally shifting in the right direction after being stuck too long in the wrong one. White found him afterward, leaning against the doorway of the break room, arms crossed, something close to a smile on her face for the first time in days. "You did that," she said quietly. "We did that," Frederick corrected. "Wouldn't have gotten anywhere without you pulling those records, or Nadine getting Darcy to talk." White nodded, letting the moment sit for a second before her expression sobered slightly. Don't get too comfortable yet. Valerie's assault charge is still active, which is good, but an inquiry isn't a conviction. Emerson still has plenty of room to fight this, and men like him don't go down without swinging back hard. Frederick knew she was right, but for the first time in weeks, sitting there in that break room with the story finally breaking wide open, he let himself feel something close to hope. He should have known better than to trust it just yet. The good feeling didn't last 2 weeks. It started small, the way these things always seem to start. A procedural motion, filed quietly by Perry Lobert on behalf of the Emerson family, arguing that the subpoenaed phone records used to open the ethics inquiry hadn't followed proper chain of custody protocol. Frederick read the filing when White forwarded it to him, his stomach sinking with every paragraph. "They're saying the records are inadmissible?" he asked, standing in her office, the printed motion trembling slightly in his hand. "They're saying the process wasn't documented cleanly enough to guarantee the records weren't altered before they reached the DA's office." White's voice was flat, exhausted. "It's a technicality, a weak one, but it doesn't need to be strong. It just needs to create enough doubt to stall things. Can they actually win that argument? They don't need to win it outright. They just need a judge sympathetic enough to pause the inquiry while it gets sorted out." White rubbed her eyes. "And guess who has a lot of friends on the bench?" The inquiry stalled within days, paused pending review of the evidence chain, exactly like White predicted. Frederick felt the ground shift beneath him, the momentum they'd built over the past weeks grinding to a halt. Then came the worst news. Nadine called him on a Thursday evening, her voice tight and apologetic, before she'd even finished her first sentence. Darcy recanted. Frederick sat down hard on his kitchen chair. "What do you mean, recanted?" "She's saying she felt pressured during our interview, that she wasn't in the right state of mind, that she exaggerated details about the reassignment pattern." Nadine sounded furious, frustrated in a way Frederick hadn't heard from her before. "She won't return my calls now. I think somebody got to her." Frederick closed his eyes, picturing Perry Lobert's calm smile in the parking lot outside his apartment. He didn't need proof to know exactly what had happened. Somebody had made Darcy Farrell an offer, or a threat, or both, and it had worked. "Without her on record," Nadine said quietly, "the story loses its strongest piece. It's still true. I still believe every word of it. But the DA's office is going to need more than public records, and a source who's now denying what she said." The final blow came 3 days later. Frederick sat across from the IA panel in a small conference room at headquarters. 3 officers he barely recognized, studying a folder in front of them while he waited for their verdict. He'd told the truth from the start. He'd narrated every second of that stop on his body cam, exactly the way he'd been trained. He believed, right up until the moment they spoke, that the footage would protect him the way it always had before. It didn't. The panel finds that Officer Balmond exercised excessive discretion in escalating a routine traffic stop to a physical arrest, the lead panelist read aloud, voice clinical, detached. "Effective immediately, Officer Balmond is suspended without pay, pending further review." Frederick sat frozen, the words landing like a slow, heavy weight settling over his chest. He wanted to argue, wanted to point out that the footage clearly showed Valerie shoving him first, that there was nothing excessive about placing cuffs on someone who'd just assaulted him in broad daylight. But he already knew arguing wouldn't change anything. The decision had been made before he ever walked into that room. That same week, word came down that Valerie's assault charge, the one solid piece of accountability still standing in the whole mess, was being offered a plea deal. A minor infraction, no jail time, barely more than a slap on the wrist, dressed up to look like justice on paper. Frederick sat alone in his apartment that night, the television off, his badge and gun locked away in a drawer where they didn't belong yet. Not this soon. Not like this. He thought about everything he'd built over the past few weeks: the spreadsheet, the records, Nadine's articles, Darcy's confession, all of it dismantled piece by people who knew exactly which threads to pull. He thought about his fiancée, worried and quiet in the next room, trying not to ask questions she already suspected she wouldn't like the answers to. He thought about Valerie Amerson, walking free, probably already back at another luncheon, already telling this story to her friends as an inconvenience she'd survived. Frederick sat with the weight of it for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling further from justice than he had since the day this all started. Then, slowly, a thought surfaced through the exhaustion, small but sharp, cutting through the fog in his mind. The department's copy of his footage was the one they'd used to build their case against him, but it wasn't the only copy that existed. Frederick was at his kitchen table before the sun came up, laptop already open, his personal hard drive plugged in beside it. He hadn't slept much. He hadn't really tried. He pulled up the department's copy of his body cam footage first, the same file IA had reviewed before handing down his suspension. He watched it slowly, carefully, comparing it against his memory of that afternoon on the street. Something was missing. The department's version cut in a few seconds after Valerie had already gotten out of her car. Gone was the moment where Frederick gently guided her back from the open traffic lane. Gone was the full length of her threat, trimmed down to a shorter clip that made her outburst seem sudden, disconnected from anything Frederick had done or said. The footage still showed the shove, still showed the arrest, but stripped of context, it read differently, colder. Like Frederick had escalated things out of nowhere instead of responding to an assault. His hands were shaking slightly as he closed that file and opened his own. His personal backup, saved the same night as always, played back exactly as he remembered it. Every second intact. Valerie's full threat, unedited, echoing clearly through his kitchen. "Do you know who I am? My husband is Judge Amerson. I will end your career before dinner." The shove. The citation book hitting the pavement. All of it, time-stamped, untouched, exactly the way it happened. Frederick sat back, heart pounding, a strange mix of anger and relief flooding through him at once. He pulled up the phone log notes next, the ones he'd jotted down that very first night, cross-referencing them against the subpoenaed records Nadine had already confirmed. The timeline lined up perfectly. Valerie's call to the courthouse clerk, made before any call to a lawyer. All captured on his original, unedited footage's audio in the background as she screamed at him on the street. This wasn't just proof that she'd assaulted him. This was proof that everything happening since then, the reassignment, the recantation, the stalled inquiry, traced back to a single, unbroken thread. A thread that started the moment she'd picked up her phone and called the clerk's line instead of a lawyer's. Frederick didn't waste time. He picked up his phone and called Nadine first, waking her before 7 in the morning. She answered groggy but alert the second he explained what he'd found. "Send it to me," she said immediately. "Everything. The full file, the timestamps, all of it." "I will, but I need to go through the right channels too. This can't just be a story. It needs to be evidence." "Agreed. Who else knows?" "Nobody yet. I'm calling White next." He hung up and dialed White's number, his fingers steady now, driven by something clearer than anger. White picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp with surprise at the early hour. "Balmond, what's wrong?" "I found something," Frederick said. "The footage IA used to build their case against me. It's edited, trimmed, missing context that changes the entire picture." There was a pause on the line, long enough that Frederick wondered if the call had dropped. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure. I have my own copy. Untouched, full length, timestamps intact. It shows everything. The threat, the assault, even the audio catching the moment she mentions calling someone before her lawyer." Another pause, shorter this time. "Bring it to me. Today. In person." "There's something else," Frederick added. I'm suspended, Captain. I don't have standing to push this forward on my own anymore. You don't need standing, White said, and for the first time in weeks, her voice carried something close to fire in it. I do. And frankly, your suspension gives me more room to move than I had before. Nobody can accuse me of protecting my own officer if you're not technically my officer right now, on paper. I can push this as an independent captain flagging evidence tampering, full stop. Frederick felt something steady settle into his chest, the first real solid ground he'd stood on in days. What happens now? Now, White said, I make some calls. I want that evidence chain documented properly this time. No gaps, no room for anyone to argue chain of custody nonsense like they did before. And I'm going to personally request the ethics inquiry be reopened, citing tampered evidence as grounds. Frederick closed his laptop carefully, the weight of the morning settling over him differently than the weight of the past few weeks had. This wasn't hope anymore. This was momentum. I'll be there within the hour, he said. Frederick arrived at the precinct within the hour, just like he'd promised, carrying his personal hard drive wrapped carefully in a jacket pocket, like it was something fragile. White met him at a side entrance instead of the front desk, her face set with a kind of focus he hadn't seen from her in weeks. We do this right, she said, leading him to a small conference room instead of her office. Every step documented. No shortcuts, no gaps anyone can point to later. She'd already called in a technician from the department's digital evidence unit, a quiet, careful woman named Officer Reyes's cousin, who Frederick vaguely remembered seeing around the building before. The technician logged the hard drive the moment Frederick handed it over, cataloging the timestamps, verifying the file hadn't been altered since its creation date, building a clean paper trail from the very first minute. This is the kind of documentation that should have existed from the start, White muttered, watching the technician work. No more excuses for anyone to hide behind a technicality. While the evidence unit processed the footage properly, Frederick called Nadine and arranged to meet her that afternoon. She showed up with her laptop already open, a fresh document waiting, ready to write the moment she had something solid to work with. Walk me through it again, she said. Everything in order. Frederick laid it all out for her. The trimmed department footage, the untouched original, the audio catching Valerie's threat in full, the timeline of her calls matching exactly what the subpoenaed records had already shown. Nadine typed fast, occasionally stopping to ask sharp, clarifying questions, making sure every detail lined up before she committed it to print. This changes everything, she said finally, sitting back. It's not just proof of what happened during the arrest anymore. It's proof somebody inside the department tampered with evidence to protect the Amersons. That's a much bigger story. Be careful how you frame it, Frederick said. I don't want this to look like I'm just trying to save my own job. I know how to frame it, Nadine said, already typing again. The evidence speaks for itself. I just have to lay it out clearly enough that nobody can twist it. Her article published 2 days later, timed carefully with White's formal submission to the district attorney's office. The headline was blunt, impossible to misread. Body cam footage used to suspend officer was edited. New evidence reveals. The piece walked readers through the discrepancy step by step, comparing timestamps, laying out the missing seconds, connecting it directly back to the stalled ethics inquiry into Judge Emerson. The reaction was immediate. Local news picked it up within hours. By evening, it had climbed onto statewide outlets again, the story gaining a second wind that felt even stronger than the first. White's formal submission to the DA's office carried real weight this time, backed by a clean, documented evidence chain that left no room for the kind of technical objections Perry Lobert had used before. The DA's office reviewed it within days and issued a new statement. The previously stalled ethics inquiry into Judge Rio Emerson would be formally reopened, with a public hearing scheduled to address both the judge's conduct and the newly discovered evidence tampering connected to Frederick's suspension. White called Frederick into her office to deliver the news personally, a rare, small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Both matters are getting reviewed together. Your case and the judge's. Same hearing. That's good, right? It's good, White confirmed. It means the panel has to look at the full picture at once. Can't separate one from the other and quietly bury the parts that matter. Frederick nodded slowly, feeling something steady settle into his chest, sturdier than the shaky hope he'd felt weeks earlier. This time, the evidence trail was airtight. No missing seconds, no convenient gaps, just the truth, documented properly from start to finish. That night, still suspended, still without his badge, Frederick sat at his kitchen table one final time before the hearing. He opened his personal copy of the footage and watched it once more, start to finish, the same way he had the very first night. Valerie's voice rang out clearly through his small apartment. "Do you know who I am?" Frederick closed the laptop gently, a quiet, steady certainty settling over him. Tomorrow, everyone would know exactly who she was. The county courthouse was packed by 9 in the morning, every seat in the public gallery filled, reporters lining the back wall with cameras and notepads ready. Frederick sat near the front beside White, his suit stiff and unfamiliar, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Nadine sat a few rows back, laptop open, ready to write the moment anything happened. Across the aisle, Judge Rayo Emerson sat beside Perry Lubert, his face composed, carefully blank, the kind of stillness that came from years of sitting on the other side of hearings just like this one. Valerie sat behind them, arms crossed, jaw tight, refusing to look anywhere near Frederick. The hearing panel took their seats, 3 officials tasked with reviewing both matters together, exactly as White had arranged. The lead panelist called the room to order, and the proceedings began. The DA's office presented first, laying out the timeline clearly for the panel. The original traffic stop, the assault, the reassignment of Valerie's case, the pattern of dismissals uncovered in Judge Emerson's courtroom over the years. Then came the footage. Frederick watched the screen at the front of the room as his personal, unedited body cam file played in full for the first time in public. The stop. Valerie stepping into traffic. Her voice, sharp and clear, echoing through the courtroom. "Do you know who I am? My husband is Judge Emerson. I will end your career before dinner." The shove. The citation book hitting the pavement. Every second, exactly as it happened. Nothing trimmed, nothing softened. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Valerie's face had gone pale, her earlier composure cracking slightly, as her own words filled the room, undeniable, unedited, playing out in front of everyone. Next came the department's edited version, played side by side for comparison. The missing seconds were obvious now, laid bare in front of the panel. White took the stand briefly, walking through the documented evidence chain, explaining clearly how the discrepancy had been discovered and verified. Then Nadine's recorded interview with Darcy Farrell played, the clerk's original statement, unedited, admitting to years of coordinating case reassignments for Emerson-connected defendants. The panel listened in silence, several of them taking notes. Frederick's apartment building security footage came next, quiet but damning, showing Perry Lober approaching him in the parking lot that night, the timestamp lining up exactly with the timeline of the stalled inquiry. It didn't capture audio, but paired with Frederick's own testimony about the conversation, the mention of his fiancée's nursing license, the veiled threat, the picture became impossible to ignore. Perry tried to object twice, standing quickly each time, insisting the footage was circumstantial, that intent couldn't be proven from a silent recording. But the panel had already heard enough. The pattern wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was documented, time-stamped, corroborated from 4 separate directions, all pointing toward the same conclusion. Frederick was called to testify near the end of the session. He kept his answers calm and factual, the same way he'd narrated every stop he'd ever made, laying out exactly what happened without exaggeration, without anger, letting the evidence carry the weight instead of his emotions. "I did my job that day," he said, near the close of his testimony. "I've done my job every day since." The only difference is that this time somebody with power didn't like the outcome, and they had the means to try changing it. The room stayed quiet after he finished, the kind of quiet that meant something had landed. Judge Emerson was given the chance to respond, but his answers came out clipped, defensive, offering little beyond insisting the reassignment had been a standard scheduling matter, and that he'd had no direct knowledge of Darcy Farrell's actions. Nobody in the room looked convinced, least of all the panel members writing notes at the front table. By the time the session ended, the mood in the courtroom had shifted entirely. The panel's lead official gathered the papers in front of her, glancing briefly toward both sides of the room before speaking. "Given the volume and weight of evidence presented today, this panel will take the matter under advisement. Rulings on both Officer Ballman's suspension and Judge Emerson's conduct will be issued within the week." The gavel came down, and the room erupted into quiet, urgent conversation. Reporters already typing, whispering into phones, racing to file updates. Frederick sat still for a moment, watching Valerie being led out through a side door, her earlier fire completely gone, replaced by something closer to fear. White leaned toward him, voice low. "That's as good as it gets before the ruling comes down." Frederick nodded slowly, watching Perry Lobert gather his files, his composed expression finally starting to crack at the edges. For the first time in weeks, Frederick let himself believe it. This was almost over. The ruling came down 6 days later, on a Thursday morning, delivered through a short public statement from the county's Judicial Oversight Board. Frederick read it standing in his kitchen, phone in hand, the same spot where he'd spent so many nights building the case that had finally brought them here. Judge Rayo Emerson was formally removed from the bench, effective immediately. The statement didn't soften the language. It cited a documented pattern of judicial misconduct, coordinated case reassignments benefiting connected defendants, and obstruction tied to tampered evidence in an active internal affairs matter. A separate criminal investigation had already been opened, led by the State Attorney General's office, examining the full scope of the scheme. Frederick read it twice, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been wound tight for weeks. He kept scrolling. Valerie Emerson's original assault charge had been reinstated in full, the earlier plea deal thrown out entirely once the tampering came to light. No leniency this time. No quiet infraction buried in paperwork. 2 weeks later, a jury would convict her on all counts, and this time, no phone call to anyone would change the outcome. Perry Lobert didn't escape either. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, intimidation of a police officer. The charges piled up fast once investigators started pulling the same threads Frederick and Nadine had been pulling for weeks. His phone buzzed before he could finish reading. White's name flashed on the screen. "You saw it," she said. Not really a question. "I saw it." Frederick's voice came out rougher than he expected. "There's more. Your suspension's been formally voided. Full back pay. Effective from the day it started. IA's original finding against you has been thrown out completely." A pause, and he could hear something warm in her voice now. Something he hadn't heard in weeks. "Come in tomorrow. There's something I want to do properly. In front of everyone. Not over the phone." The next morning, Frederick walked into the precinct in his uniform for the first time in weeks, badge back on his chest where it belonged. Officers he'd worked beside for years lined the hallway, a few clapping him on the shoulder as he passed, others just nodding, letting the moment speak for itself. White stood at the front of the briefing room, a small box in her hands. She didn't make a long speech. She never had been one for that. 6 years ago, this department hired an officer who does things the right way, even when the right way is the hardest path available. She opened the box, revealing a new badge inside, a detective's shield, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Frederick Balmond built an entire case from nothing but public records and a habit of backing up his own work. That's not luck. That's the kind of officer this department needs more of. She held it out to him. Frederick took it, the weight of it settling into his palm, solid and real. "Effective today," White said. "Detective Balmond." The room broke into applause, genuine and warm. And for a moment, Frederick let himself feel it fully. Not just relief, but something closer to pride. Earned the hard way, piece by piece, through weeks that had tested every part of him. Later that afternoon, he stopped by the small office Nadine worked out of, dropping off a coffee as a thank you. She grinned at him from behind her desk, already working on her next story. "Detective now," she said. "Guess I'll need a better source inside the department." "You've got my number," Frederick said. "Use it wisely." That evening, he drove home slower than usual. Windows down, the weight of the past several weeks finally starting to feel like something behind him instead of something pressing down on his chest. His fiancée was waiting when he walked through the door, and for the first time in a long time, dinner passed without either of them checking their phones every few minutes, waiting for the next bad update. Before bed, Frederick set his new detective badge on the dresser beside his body cam, still clipped to his old uniform from the day before. He looked at it for a moment, thinking back to that afternoon outside the elementary school, the swerving car, the woman who thought her husband's name was enough to make consequences disappear. She'd been wrong. Frederick turned off the light, the badge catching one last glint from the hallway lamp before the room went dark. Tomorrow, he'd clip it on for his first shift as a detective. Body cam already running out of habit, the same habit that had brought down a judge, and finally, after everything, brought him home. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.